Grand rising, grand arrival, grand return, peace and blessings to the righteous and the repentant alike. I am Chief Sophia of the Americana Band of Indians, and this is an old school style research video, so sit back and relax. I can't show the screen because I have way too many notes, so we're just going to do some reading here. And I'm going to put this information into the ley line because it does pertain to our fast. So, if you all remember from the Ruth and Naomi fast video, which will be either reposted or linked, trying to open up to the scripture, it says, it talks specifically about a particular entity dealing with Naomi, she says, dealt with her unfavorably. I'm trying to see. Do, 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 do. I'm trying to see if I can find the scripture. Here we go. Ruth chapter 1 verse 20 out of this is the Orthodox Study Bible. But she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me bitter, for the Almighty," which you're talking about Shaddai, "has dealt very bitterly with me." And so at the time when I was doing the research for our first Ruth and Naomi fast, I knew that Naomi had to be a priestess of Shaddai, because why would she say specifically that Shaddai dealt bitterly with her unless she was a worshiper of Shaddai? And so no comments. Nobody provided any insight, their thoughts, other supplementary research for me to go off in another direction. So I left that information where it was, and I haven't come back to it till, as I mentioned, I'm researching the Zolkin calendar, and I was trying to put some information together, and because I have a particular entity come into my awareness yesterday that I knew nothing about. And so I'm like, okay, what is this related to? So I figure it out. I'm going through the research, and I get to the very end of the different entities I was researching. And then lo and behold, Shaddai shows up. And I'm like, okay, this right here is weird. Shaddai, because it never tells you what Shaddai means. But they know what Shaddai means because I literally found it. So Shaddai is a mountain goddess. Now they say a god, but we know for a fact that this is a goddess. This is related to, if you're familiar with the Erikadeshi, Malachiel, which is mountains, or the reign of God. This is the south, related to earth in the summer. Okay, so this is an energy that is coming up here in a few days, for various reasons that we won't go into. But let me read to you about Malachiel. Malachiel, which is mountains, speak the language of holiness. It means reign of God, and it's repentance for being satisfied to let God work alone. Body of the burden of God in guidance, guardian of God's guidance, elder of the determined, elder of those who see that God reigns, teacher of faith and worship, and is the enemy accuser of wickedness, is the herald of oneness and judgment. So this is what Malachiel is related to. Now, I say that this is who this is Shaddai. This is who the physical or the spiritual manifestation of the mountains is Shaddai. And Shaddai is who Naomi was working with. And let's just read about the Temple of Shaddai, and then I have two other articles I'm going to read to you from, but this is related to the Air Kadeshi. And as you can see, they didn't quite understand the words because they said, um, the enemy or accuser of wickedness, but I don't think it's not, or rather, we're going to add bitterness on here. It's the enemy accuser of bitterness, not wickedness. So I'm just updating my notes. All right, so we're done with that for a minute. Now, let's read about the Temple of Shaddai, and I'll put the links, if I remember, in the description so you can take a look at these websites. The Temple of Shaddai, the god of the or goddess of the mountain. Introduction to Shaddai. Shaddai is a prominent figure in Babylonian and Mesopotamian mythology, often associated with mountains and divine power. As a mountain deity, Shaddai embodies the strength and majesty of the natural world, reflecting the ancient Mesopotamians' reverence for the formidable forces of nature. In Mesopotamian culture, mountain deities held significant importance, symbolizing stability, endurance, and the connection between the heavens and the earth. Mountains were viewed as sacred spaces where the mortals could connect with the divine, making Shaddai a pivotal figure in the spiritual landscape of ancient civilizations. Historical context. The Temple of Shaddai is believed to have been located in the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, possibly near the city of Ur or Babylon. Archaeologists have uncovered various artifacts and structures that suggest significant site dedicated to the worship of Shaddai. Findings include altars, inscriptions, and artworks that depict the deity in various forms. Timeline. The construction of the Temple of Shaddai likely dates back to the early dynastic period of Mesopotamia, around 3000 BCE. Over the centuries, it became a central place of worship, attracting pilgrims and devotees. The temple's architecture was a testament to the ingenuity of builders, featuring towering ziggurats that symbolized the ascent to the divine. The cultural relevance of the temple was profound, serving not only as a religious center but as a hub for social and economic activities. Festivals and rituals conducted at the temple played a crucial role in the community's cohesion. Iconography. Shaddai was often depicted in temple art as a majestic figure, sometimes shown with a mountain backdrop or holding symbols of power. Artistic representations varied widely, showcasing the deity in various forms, including a crowned figure representing authority, images of mountains symbolizing strength and permanence, animals such as eagles or lions indicating the power and protection, symbolism associated with mountains and divine power. Mountains in Mesopotamian mythology were seen as dwelling places of the gods, places where mortals could encounter the divine. The symbolism of mountains included stability. Mountains represented unwavering strength. Connection. They served as bridges between the earthly realm and the heavens. Protection. The heights of the mountains were seen as safe havens from chaos. Rituals and worship practices. The rituals at the Temple of Shaddai were elaborate and diverse, often involving music, dance, and offerings. Key ceremonies included seasonal festivals celebrating the mountain's fertility, rituals for rain and agricultural abundance, purification rites for devotees seeking blessings. Roles of priests and priestesses. Priests and priestesses played a vital role in the worship of Shaddai, acting as intermediaries between the deity and the people. Responsibilities included conducting rituals and ceremonies, maintaining the temple and its offerings, interpreting divine messages through omens and signs. Myths and legends. Shaddai features several myths that highlight his/her power and influence. One notable myth involves his/her interactions with other deities, such as his rival Tiamat, the primordial goddess of chaos. Let me pause. Why would a man have a rival that was a woman? That's not right. That's how you know, number one, Shaddai and Tiamat was at odds. Okay? His alliance with Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon, during the fight against chaos. So Shaddai, she was against chaos, which was Tiamat, and with Marduk, which was also against the chaos. The legends of Shaddai providing guidance to mortals in times of need. The significance of these myths. The myths surrounding Shaddai were essential in shaping cultural beliefs of the Mesopotamians. They reinforced the idea of divine order, importance of worship, relationship between gods and humanities. These stories served as moral lessons and provided a framework for understanding the world. Theological implications. Mountains were often viewed as sacred in the Mesopotamian religion. They were seen as places where the divine could be encountered, a belief that transcended individual deities. Worshipping Shaddai and other mountain gods reflected a deeper understanding of the universe, where nature and the divine were intertwined. This is why Jesus, on his very first 40-day fast, where did he go? He went to Shaddai, into the mountains. Where did Elijah go? Where was he headed when he killed all those 450 prophets of Baal? To Shaddai, to the mountain. Now, he was going to Hermoni, which is Adair Kadeshi, Mount Hermon, but still, he was headed to the mountains, okay? And remember, Adair Kadeshi just means incarnated. It's not evil, it's incarnated. All right, let me keep going. Mountain worship was not unique to Mesopotamia. Other cultures revered mountain deities. For instance, in the Canaanite pantheon, El was associated with the mountains. Now we know why they say El Shaddai. Okay, they're talking about the mother, father. Our God is one. The Shema. El is the masculine. Shaddai is the feminine. El Shaddai. This is why. So, whenever you hear somebody say El something, they're talking about the unification of the masculine and the feminine. It's not going to be a man unified with another man, okay? For all of you in the back seat, okay? It's not gonna. That's not how it works. It's a masculine combined with a feminine, male and female. He created them, okay? Not male and male, not female and female, male and female. He created them. This thing is weird. Okay, let's keep going. Greek mythology featured Olympus, home of the gods. Hinduism reveals the Himalayas as sacred. This shared reverence for mountains indicates a common human experience of seeking the divine in nature. The decline of the Temple of Shaddai. The decline of the Temple of Shaddai can be attributed to several factors, including shifts in political power and the rise of new deities, natural disasters that may have damaged the temple, economic changes that reduced the temple's influence. As empires rose and fell in Mesopotamia, the worship of Shaddai diminished. The assimilation of cultures and the introduction of new religions led to the eventual abandonment of the temple, marking the end of an era in Babylonian spirituality. Legacy. The legacy of the Temple of Shaddai continues to influence contemporary interpretations of Babylonian mythology. Scholars and enthusiasts alike draw from the rich history of Shaddai to understand the ancient beliefs and practices. In modern culture, the Temple of Shaddai has been referenced in literature, art, and even spiritual practices. It serves as a symbol of the enduring human connection to the divine and the natural world, inspiring a new generation to explore the depths of ancient mythology. So that's one article. Now we're going to look at another article. This article is actually starts out talking about the Cedar Mountain, which I'll just tell you here. I don't think cedars are the cedar tree that we know today is not the cedar tree of the Bible. The cedar tree of the Bible is the breadfruit tree. Okay, it's the breadfruit tree. And again, we don't have breadfruit trees locally, natively in the America land anymore, because when the British colonizers came to America, they saw these breadfruit trees. The trees had the capacity to basically, these trees produced latex, natural latex. And so the wood from these trees made the boats float better because they were naturally buoyant because of the latex. And so they came to this land. They cut down all of the trees, all of the breadfruit trees that were here to build their ships. And then they proceeded to take those ships to use them to conquer the rest of the world. So there's no way that Britain could have conquered the world without taking the breadfruit trees from America, putting them in their ships, and literally being able to float when they should have sank. And that will be forthcoming. Someone will all of a sudden discover that. You know what happens over here. Oh, and it's not El Shaddai, it's Al Shaddai. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. El is a feminine version. So we're talking about Al, A-L. And in the pantheon of lunar mansions, as it relates to the Arabic lunar mansions, everything is an Al. Al something, Al this, Al that. Almost everything is an Al something. So we know they're talking about Al as in the, what did it say over here? I'm sorry, y'all. Here we go. L. So in the Canaanites, they worship El, but in the Hindu mythology, not Hindu, I'm sorry. In the Arabic mythology, they work with Al, but they're all the same. So, but El is masculine. No, El is feminine. Canaanites work with females. And the what's the names work with the male. That oh my God, I keep saying Hindu. The Arabic pantheon, they work with males. So Al Shaddai would be the unification of the masculine and the feminine. Okay, so let's talk about Al Shaddai. In the ancient accepted Scottish rite, the sacred word for the 22nd degree is the degree under present consideration. So we're talking about the 22nd degree. So let me tell you. Malachiel, I didn't mention this before. Malachiel goes from 21 degrees, 25 minutes of Leo to 4 degrees, 17 minutes of Virgo. So we are talking about the 22nd degree, okay? It covers the 22nd degree. All right. The sacred words, according to Cerno Masons exposed in the Blanchard Scotch Rite Illustrated, are Noah, Bezaleel, Sedonis. For the reasons we have already given elsewhere, we hold Pike's Book of Words to be the authority, as Al Shaddai is a name that belongs in the locale. In Blanchard's ritual for the 32nd degree, the passwords are Thakol, Farish Kol, Thakol, which is separated, Farish Kol, which is reunited, Nekham Makah, blow, calamity, revenge, Shaddai, the strong, the mighty, a name of a deity. And that process, separated, reunited, blow, and strong, those are the phases of the sun. The separated is the dawn, right? The reunited is the dusk. The Nekem Marka, which is blow, calamity, revenge, that's nighttime when the sun is not here. And Shaddai is the that phraseology refers to the midday sun. And I've been doing a lot of deep diving into the midday sun, but that's what that's related to. According to Mackenzie, this name is alluded to in Exodus 6:13 as the name of a deity. And in Albright, El Shaddai is the patriarchal God, the God of the fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. According to another source, Al Shaddai, is based on Shadu, a mountain name. This is a mountain goddess of some sort. Yet another suggestion to the divine feminine at the root of all these big daddy, kick-ass white boy guys, which we know for a fact. Sadeh, he of the mountains, though a more obviously secondary appellation, belongs semantically with Sir, Albright, Yahweh and the gods of Canaan, page 188. It was Moses' acceptance of the old faith in the God of the fathers that led him to identify Yahweh with the God of the fathers as well as with Shaddai. Which, remember, when Moses went on the mountain to receive the instruction, it was Shaddai who was talking to him. It was the goddess of the mountains who he was interacting with. Because I'd said this in a video 3 years ago, it was obvious to me that he was talking to a female, not to a male. But remember the Shema, the Lord our God is one. And so that's how he squared that circle. The paternal God of the patriarchs, Shaddai, as I pointed out, the same word does not mean simply mountaineer, but properly one who inhabits the mountains, is now paralleled in similar ancient caravanning societies, especially among the early Assyrian merchants to the 19th and 18th centuries BC, as well as among the Nabateans and other North Arabian caravanners in the first centuries. So then, it is a specific God, the God of the fathers of the Israelites, and cognate with Nergal, as discussed above, geographic locales aside, and not forgotten by the time of the Nabateans. A.H. Sace, in his excellent Lectures on the Origin and Growth of Religion, as illustrated by the religion of the ancient Babylonians, gives us the following. The sacred mounds of Babylonia, the sacred mounds of Babylonia, in fact, like the Gilgals of Palestine, appear to have been the sites of older structures which had long fallen to decay. Now, they didn't fall into decay. When we came to places and defeated these people for worshiping these foreign gods, right? The foreign gods, not the Erkadeshi. They gave them their other names. When we came to the places and they were worshiping foreign gods, we destroyed everything and left nothing left. It was all turned to dust. We did not allow them to maintain their foreign gods. This is shown in the story of Moses, where the people had built this golden idol. He made them eat it. He made them eat it. He ground it to dust and made them eat it. That's what we do. When you go somewhere, you destroy everything. Burn it all down. Okay? And around which fancy and tradition were allowed to play freely. They had in this way become veritable hills, tumuli, as we should term them in our modern archaeological, vocabulary, and as such deserve the venerable title of Sadu, or mountain. New temples like that of the mountain of the world could be named after them. But this did not imply a recollection that the sacred mounds had once been temples themselves. They were rather, like the mountains of the eastern frontier, the everlasting altars of the gods, on whose summits worship could most fittingly be paid to the deities of heaven. And like the mountains, they were something more than altars. They were themselves divine, the visible habitations of the spirits of the air. It is possible that Professor Friedrich Delitzsch is right in proposing to see the Assyrian Sadu, or mountain, the explanation of the Hebrew title of the deity El Shaddai. Footnote: Mulil is called Kurgal and Sadu Rabu in Semitic, the great mountain. The god Kurgal is rendered by Bel. Bel is a dragon, okay? In the list of Babylonian kings, in which the meaning of their names is explained, the Akkadian Guzi Karsag men is interpreted Sagil Sa Iduni. Sagil is our mountain. At all events, God is compared to the rock in the Old Testament, and the worship of sacred stones widely spread through the Semitic world. This brings us back to the essays that form Book 3 of the work, namely, is this the holy mountain, the stone that fell to earth, the world tree, and the cosmic pillar? Also, it is worth mentioning that the old name for mountain, Kersag, is part of the name Nin Harsag, Lady of the Mountain. According to Sitchin, at least, her mountain was on the Sinai Peninsula a place sacred to Hathor. Some very interesting things tied together in this name and the imagery invoked by the descriptions above of the cedar mountain, right? Which we know is not cedar, we know it is breadfruit. Okay? So we shall finish off our discussion of El Shaddai by shocking some, perhaps pleasing others, but only representing our findings to date as we have found them. First, it is not out of place to mention that the divine and holy name El Shaddai is one of the particular bones of contention that is the present day, i.e., mid 1990s, crop of no good anti Masons throwing a temper tantrum over, like the spoiled brats in their high chairs, banging their spoons and wailing in the desert. Interestingly enough, it is over this word and the degree of the night of Kadosh that they have the most problems with. If the Freemasons are pressured into eliminating these, they will soon be on the road to getting rid of the whole thing. Traditional family values, after all. What a crock. Because what they're saying is they don't want it to be a female. They want it to be all men. And so if Shaddai is a feminine name, a goddess, they don't want it. The Masons in the by the time they got to the 1990s, did not want to deal with a female goddess. Now, mind you, just for remembrance sake, in 1992, we went into the age of Leo. We went into the age of Leo. That is when the goddess was supposed to re-emerge. And you have primary contenders number one saying that they don't want anything to do with a female goddess, even though it was the time for the female goddess, the daughter, to rule. So that's one part. All right. Nothing can be more traditional, more family oriented, more filled with values than the royal tradition, by extension, the authentic tradition. Never forget that. What is worthless, immoral, ungodly is the brand of Christianity that gets on television. Ooh, child, I'm not saying this, I'm reading this off the page. That gets on television, begs for money to keep the makeup and hair staff employed. No! Pat Robinson, oh my goodness, you and your diseased breed belong in the arena with the lions. But we would hope the lions had better taste than that, since they are, after all, kings of the beast. Otherwise, throw in a few 5-gallon cans of antacid tablets and diarrhea medication and antibiotics. I'm sorry. Lord have mercy. They're right, though. They're right. Totally right. We now turn to Kenneth Grant, just for kicks, in his work, Aleister Crowley and the Hidden God. One of the major god forms held holy by the earliest cults was that of the pig, sacred to Typhon, the dark lord of draconian tradition. The pig was considered an unclean animal by later cults because it was known to be the only animal that ate human excrement. Our note, humans go on that list nowadays. It is significant that the Jews cast it out as abhorrent when they switched from the stellar worship of El Shaddai, Al Shatain. Let me tell y'all what the name of the Hebrew, I mean, not the Hebrew, what's the name of the day for that is. You're talking about Shaddai. That's day 12 over here. 7. No, that's not it. I'm sorry, I got a lot of pages, y'all. Is it this one? Al Shatain. I saw that one. Al Shatain. Hold on. It's not exact. I'm sorry, y'all. I got a lot of pages here. I remember seeing Al Shatain. Here we go. Oh, it's Al Sharatain. So maybe that's another name here. Let me put that here. El Shaddai is Al Shatain. Shaitain. Tan. Put it on day 12. Alshaitan, which is El Shaddai. I haven't had to make changes to these notes in a long time. All right. That's important. To the paternalistic solar Jehovah. Whoa, wait a minute. Let me read that sentence again. It is significant that the Jews cast it out as abhorrent when they switched from the stellar worship, lunar, okay, of El Shaddai, Al Shatain, to that of the paternalistic solar Jehovah. Now, we know that the sun is feminine. So who is this solar Jehovah? Well, the solar Jehovah is the one who is imitating the sun. It's the imitator, okay? It's the imitator. Jehovah is the imitator of the sun. Who is the imitator? Sun Wukong, who is a male entity, LARPing as a female entity. Using who? Onoskelis to what? Distract the black man. This is how all this goes together. So the solar Jehovah is literally the imitator. But the pig was originally a glyph of utmost sanctity on account of a doctrine that involved the absorption of substances which the uninitiated shun as a repellent, which indeed they are, in their unregenerate or non-sacramental form. When purified and consecrated to the service of the goddess, however, they are found to be valuable aids to the awakening of the fire snake. What is the fire snake? That's going to have to be in another video. But what they're saying is, just like when Jesus cast the demons into the pig, when you consume pork, certain demons are cast into it and therefore can be removed or expelled from your body. So all these people who have given up pork and never eat it, they never can expel these particular deities, entities from their body. That is what the pork does. And the solar fake Jehovah, Yahweh, evil Jesus, Zeus, wants you to keep all of that impurity in your body. So he can always be higher than you, better than you, greater than you. This is why all these churches tell you don't eat pork. They totally misunderstood the... I'm sorry. You read some of this stuff and let me just keep going. All right. They totally misunderstood what Jesus was saying. All right. El Shaddai, the primal star god, or actually, well, let's just leave it at the primal star god of the Chaldeans, whom the Jews replaced by Jehovah when the solar or paternalistic cult superseded that of the moon and the stars. El Shaddai is Al Shatain and the set or seat of power adored in remotest antiquity. So El Shaddai is the original God that we worshipped. Not Jehovah. Not Jehovah. It was El Shaddai. Al Shatain. And is El Shaddai or Al Shatain the creator? No. No. But it was the bridge through which we experienced the creator. We went to El Shaddai to experience the creator. Okay? But we can do that with, all the Er Kadeshi and the Der Kadeshi. But this is how we work. This is, so people are looking for, well, what did we call our God originally? We called her El Shaddai. Al Shatain. Okay? She was the seat of power. All right. As we remind the reader to consult the glossary quote of Shatain, we already quoted above in the Yazidis. Where did Grant get this idea from? Crowley? No, we won't find the stellar cult. It's called this. I need to write this down. The stellar cult. I mean, I read this, but it always hits different when you read it out loud. We might be able to pull some more information from that. All right. No, we don't find the stellar cult discussed in his writings in our possession, though he does make that remark quoted in Switzerland about his ideal form of host. Holy shalit, for sure. We do find, however, traces of this in the writings, such as such authors as Gerald Massey and the Freemason Dr. Albert Churchward. They both held Christ to be Horus, and more of that, the dual nature of the deity, one force, that Horus and Set represented. This is represented in the sky, in the stars associated with the North Pole, and the stars associated with the constellations of Leo, Orion, and of course, Sirius. This is beyond the scope of our present inquiry. Understand, when we're talking about El Shaddai, we're talking about the daughter. We're talking about Lilith, okay? What did they say happened to Lilith? She did what? She went into a cave and she had thousands of babies. Where were those babies? Were they mountains? Were they hills? See, this listen. I'm not even going to say it. I'm going to say this though. If you're trying to systematically remove and retell a story about a goddess that you always worshipped, the first thing you would do is demonize her. The first thing you would do is demonize her and make her to be less than. And we know that that's not the truth. No matter how hard they try to take it to us, if you go sit on the top of a mountain and look at the sky, you will experience God. That was in a book I read. The Satanic Verses. Anyway, I told y'all about that book. In Churchward's work, The Arcana of Freemasonry, which we have quoted already concerning the Chaldean priests who migrated to Rome and had an influence on the Collegia, the story of the stellar cult which preceded the solar cult is given. The second pyramid, one of three, was built to memorize Sut, the pyramid of Sut. When Sut was the first, the god of the pole of the south, El Shaddai. How long Sut reigned as god is impossible to state, but that he did so for many thousands of years, there is ample proof still extant. It was known by these wise men of Egypt that as they traveled north from their original homes, equatorial provinces, i.e., Arnot, i.e., the lands of Enki, Ethiopia, and his sons. Actually, they're talking about the Americas, because we know that the black tortoise of the north is the Americas. So they're talking about when they travel to the Americas, okay? Sut would go down and disappear in the underworld, and that Horus, North Pole star, would rise, would rise in the ascendant and permanently establish forever. Hence, the changes from Sut being a primary god, second, as a brother to Horus, and third, that he descended as Horus ascended. He then became the type of great evil in one form, Ap-Uat, a form of Set Anup, in another, the guider of the way of the underworld. This is where the sun is removed. So they're talking about the space where there is no light from the sun, okay? It is written and symbolized in the second pyramid. It is also symbolized as a change from the worship of El Shaddai, Phoenician name of Sut, to the worship of IHUH, who, as in Howard University, Harvard University, Hampton University, okay, or IUEU, like the European Union, Okay. And corresponds to the change from the Elohistic to the Jehovistic God, which is a change from the stellar to the solar myths. First Chronicles 12 and 5. Turn to the RSV, First Chronicles 12 and 5, to see what Churchward cites as proof of his theory. We find it does not really pertain at all. But if we quote the beginning of the chapter, let me look at my Bible. First Chronicles 12 and 5. They were looking at the wrong Bible. Of course, if you read it in the Hebrew, it's not going to read properly. So I'm not going to read that part. We're just going to turn here. First Chronicles 12 and 5. What? It says, why does it? Okay, he says, now these are the men who came to David at Ziklag. This is 12 and 1 through 3. While he could not move about freely because of Saul, the son of Kish, and they were among the mighty men who helped him in war. They were bowmen and could shoot arrows and sling stones with either right or left hand. They were Benjaminites, Saul's kinsmen, Eluzai, Jerimoth, Beliah, Shamariah, and Shephatiah the Halfrite. Let me go back and read. Now these were the men who came to David while he was still a fugitive from Saul, the son of Kish. They were among the mighty men, helpers in the war, being armed with bows for shooting arrows and using either the right hand or the left for slinging stones. They were of Benjamin, Saul's brethren. Okay, so think about stars. They shot bows, so they were shooting stars. Like, oh my goodness, they were shooting stars. They were shooting stars. Okay, Churchward cites Bealiah, Bealiah in his work. It puts together Baal and Yah, the right hand and the left hand, not only using good, the masculine and the feminine, the unincarnated and the incarnated. Like, that's what they're talking about. The unincarnated and the incarnated. Just like the Air Kadeshi are the unincarnated and the Der Kadeshi are the incarnated. Okay? That should be significant to students of the World Arch Word. Turning to Arcana, page 162 and 3, the change in Israel from the worship of El Shaddai to the worship of IHUH or Hu or Lu. Hulu, you mean like that television streaming thing y'all all watch? From the Elohistic to Jehovistic God, it corresponds with the change from the stellar to the solar doctrines. In the Ishtology of the, or Ishtology is just philosophy, okay, of the Egyptians, which can be seen and proved in the volume of Sacred Law, in the book of Chronicles, chapter 12, verse 5, in which we found that Baal Jah, as divinity, supplied a personal name. Thus, Baal is Jah. Oh, Baal is Jah. Yikes. One who is one of the Baalim, the primary or superior one of the 7 stellar attributes. The one God in Israel was made known to Moses by 2 names of IHUH and IAH. In the Egyptian, the one God in the earliest solar form was Tum, the earliest form Atum Ra, and he was Hu Hai, the eternal, the character of God the Father, and Ayu or Tim, the character of God the Son, which two were one. Moreover, Baal was El Shaddai of the Phoenicians, or was of another name for him when he changed from stellar, represented by Sut and Nup, to Horus, he was no longer to be considered one God. See Exodus 34 and 13. Thou shalt call me Ishi, I-S-H-I. That comes from the Der Kadeshi, by the way. And shall no longer, and shall call me no more Bali. Hosea 2 and 6. Therefore, to have the Hebrew character El Shaddai, or Phoenician rather, as the father, who Huiu, Iau, Ishi, etc., as his son, as represented on our cross of the 18 degrees, is quite wrong. It has no meaning, and no explanation could be given that would correct the Hebrew characters on the symbol as it is now. But if these are changed to Egyptian or the equivalent, it would be correct, would correspond, and would have the same meaning as YHUH. El Shaddai was not a form of father to HU or IU in any way. Our note, but see the Albright quotes above. He was a primary god situated on the southern pole or hemisphere for upwards of 51,000 years. And then he was deposed in favor of Horus, the god of the northern horizon. This is proved by the two great pyramids of Giza, one built for Sut and the other for Horus, their names inscribed thereon. It is clearly mentioned several times in the Egyptian ritual, our note, i.e. the Egyptian Book of the Dead. All the attributes hitherto associated with Set or the South were appropriated and given to Horus. What's that? Appropriated? You mean they were stolen? Everything that they attribute to Horus was contributed to Set. Was actually from Set. They literally stole the god of the South and gave it to the North. Well, really, that's flipped. They sold the god of the North and gave it to the South. All the attributes hitherto associated with Set of the South were appropriated and given to Horus of the North, and his cult lasted at least 300,000 years. Albright associates Horus with Ninurta, one of Enlil's sons, in stitchings the wars of gods and men. A parallel is drawn between the wars of Horus and Set, between Ninurta and Nigral. Churchward regards Set El Shaddai as the god of the South Pole. Stitching on page 136 above mentioned work states, dealing with the narrative concerning the parts of Africa were granted to Enki's sons. The southernmost domain were granted Nergal, Great Watcher, and his spouse Erishkigal. So the original god of the fathers of the Hebrews, El Shaddai, is Set, Seth, Sut, Shatain, Satan, Nergal, etc. It is more important than it would seem at first. El Shaddai of the Hebrews, Sag, Indara, Indra, etc. Set, Sut, Horus of the Egyptian, Seth of the Sethian Gnostics, Shatain of the Yazidis, Nergal of the Assyrian priests who migrated to Samaria, perhaps to the god of Dosios, Samaritan Messiah, and the original Sethian Gnostics. These are all the same. This is why you can't judge people by their skin tone. Because we may have different colors, but look at all these different ways. Indra is Indian. El Shaddai is Hebrew. Set is Egyptian. Seth is from, sort of like, I don't know. I've never heard of, Seth is in the Bible, but are they talking about the same Seth? I don't know. Shatain of the Yazidis, that's Middle Eastern. Nigral of the Assyrians, that's like, the Assyrians were from like the North, like Britain. So, we're talking about a lot, and we're talking about a lot of people who all worship the same God and call it a different name, right? Because it's the mountain. And there's mountains in all these places. So this is going to be the last one. This one's also a little bit long, but I think it's really important. This is the Babylonian world. Um, it was not written. This is a Babylonian world written, or the Routledge world, written by Gwendolyn Leake. This is from 2007. So this is chapter 18. Can't believe it. Chapter 18. Okay. The palace and the temple in Babylonia. Now this is important because, again, we started out talking about the temple, right, of El Shaddai. So this talks about what the palace and the temple actually look like. So, two institutions dominated Babylonia: the palace and the temple, representing the political power and the religious center, respectively. As seat of the political power, the palace housed the king and his court. In the temples, the dozens, even the hundreds of gods of Babylonia were venerated. The main city god or minor gods in smaller sanctuaries. Both palace and temple can be regarded as oversized houses, since one of their functions was to serve as a living palace for the king or for the deity. Therefore, the simple layout of the Babylonian house may also be seen in the gigantic dimensions of the palace or of a temple. The rooms paced around a central courtyard with one main reception room opposite the entrance. The master of the house lived in his fitting abode, the king with his family, including a large section of women, the wives, daughters, wet nurses, and their attendants, along with all the servants and officials in charge, and the god with his divine consort, the main point of reference for all women in the town, their children, and their divine staff. In a larger Babylonian city, one would find many temples, but only one palace. The latter was not necessarily restricted to the royal capital of state, but the king disposed of palaces at several places, and also provincial governors could build their palace. The different roles of palace and temple in society became immediately clear after a look at a map of any Babylonian town. An example, we take a look at the city of Babylon in the first century, the time of its largest extension, which boasts the main palaces of the Chaldean kings Nebuchadnezzar and his dynasty. The palaces supplied prominent position in the northwestern corner of the town, at the bank of the river Euphrates, and at both sides of the main street. The living quarters were separated from the palace, which itself was surrounded by massive walls. This is fitting expression of the distance and separation of royal power. Marduk, now remember, we just read that El Shaddai teamed up with Marduk against Tiamat. So people who work with Marduk are friends and not foes. And Tiamat is not our friend, okay? Marduk, Babylon's god, and by the first millennium, the divine ruler called Bel, which is the serpent, Lord, venerated highly all over the country, occupied the center of the town. The largest temple precinct occupied a remarkable portion of the whole inhabited area. I got 3 pages of Babylon. A temple was bound to its traditional place, and it was mandatory to keep the right spot of the cella at every rebuilding of the temple. The huge temple of a city's main deity is the main public building of any town, situated at its center, providing the largest open space, perhaps even the only open large space. The stepped temple tower of Babylon, the ziggurat, extending over a square of 90 meters on the ground, rose in 7 large steps to a height of probably 6 meters as an artificial massive mountain built of bricks and decorated outside. The temple towers of the main Babylonian cities become thus the most prominent landmarks in the flat alluvial plain. The position of the temple is an apt expression of its function as a. So basically, just keep in mind, the temple was built to look like a mountain. Okay, that's what they're saying. It's built to remind you, to invoke you of a mountain. And that's how these churches are built. They're tall, they're all, they're I once went to a seminar and the lady was talking about how she wanted a house that rose to greet her like a mountain. So it's a very feminine worship thing, okay? The position of the temple is an apt expression of its function as a focus of the city's identity. The main deity of a town, together with his wife, his son, and his divine staff, could constantly protect the citizens, and the people would easily reach the gods. Everybody enjoyed the annual festival where the god left the temple in a procession, and beer and food were generously distributed. Hello, Easter. Hello, Pascha. Okay? This is what it's... All right. The city God's presence was felt in everyday life too. Oaths were sworn by the city god, and not only lawsuits, but any simple legal transaction such as a marriage, adoption, or sale demanded an oath. Hello, marriage. Hello, birth. First, you're doing it in a church to the God of this land, as in Jesus. Then the government decided it wanted to be God. And so it took over these functions, which is why we don't recognize them. We don't recognize the functions of usurped deities. We don't recognize it. Okay? The presence of a deity in legal cases could be guaranteed by bringing a symbol of the god, such as a standard or a weapon. The city god was often addressed in greetings, which are known to us in a written version from private and business letters. A standard Babylonian letter to a colleague or a family member usually opened with good wishes, such as, "May God Marduk keep you in good health," Old Babylonian. "May Marduk and Nabu, i.e. Marduk's son, bless my father," Neo-Babylonian. Or, "Christ is risen. Indeed he is risen." Christ is risen. Indeed he is risen. Okay? Finally, any larger group of persons from a town could reveal the name of their city god by simply telling their names, i.e. why you get renamed with a saint name, so they know which god you worship. This is not rocket science. This is not rocket science, okay? Babylonian names often included a divine name, and many citizens gave their children names that venerated the care and help of the city god. Thus, I did. Oh my goodness. I had no idea. All right. Thus, Babylonian names consisted of little phrases such as Marduk, Apla, Edina, Marduk has given me an heir, Ina, Isagal, Shuma, Ibini. In Isagal, Marduk's temple, he has created the name, i.e. offspring, or Nabu, Balata, Ikibi, Nabu, pronounced life. That's, Nabu is Jesus in this example. The close connection between God in his temple and his town remained basically constant through the millennia, so God and city could almost become synonymous. There's no doubt. That's why America is a Christian nation and they can't do anything about it. Christ is king of this land. They have no choice. It's not up to them. But what they're doing is pretending they're saying Christ is king, and then they're turning around on the other hand and trying to say that they're king. No. It's not going to work like that. We're going back to proper order, okay? Proper order. There's no doubt that the city god and his temple became true symbols of the city for all its inhabitants. This connection between God and his city in Babylonia can sometimes be detected in the cuneiform signs used to express a town or god. So the sun god city, Larsa, is written with a combination of the sign for sun, God, and for abode. If this sign of abode or place is combined with the standard of Inanna, then one gets the name Inanna's town, Zablam, with the standard of the moon god Nana, resulting in the ideogram is the one of the moon god city, Ur. In, on the other hand, a main god could be just called Lord in his city, like Ningirsu, that is the Lord of the city Girsu, Nibru, Lady of the city of Nippur. So this is why in the Bible they use these words interchangeably. You have to know where they're talking about in order to know what God they're talking about. As I mentioned about 1,000 times, as we've been doing this research, it all depends on where the story takes place, who they're talking about. And so if you think it's taking place in that country over there, then they're talking about their gods, Jehovah and the rest of them. But if it's taking place over here in the motherland, then they're talking about Shaddai, our God. Okay? These examples indicate that the close connection between city and deity evolved at least in the first stage of the development of writing around 3000 BC or in the early 3rd millennium. A considerable number of persons, especially after the better families, took part in the daily provisioning of the temple. The deity literally lived in the temple and therefore had to be served beverages and food several times a day. These daily offerings were prepared by citizens who held the respective rights and who were entitled to use the leftovers of the divine meal. This is a problem. Like, people work these jobs. Like, let's say you work at fast food, right? And you spend all day serving people at fast food. They want to just throw the food away. They don't even want to give the food to the employees. That's against the order. You should just be giving the food. Like, I remember when I worked at Popeyes, and I would be like, yeah, I'll just take whatever's left at the end of the night. That's why I can't eat Popeyes now. Although they do, they cook they fry their their chicken fresh and all that, but it's just, I had way too much because I worked at Popeyes, and when I worked at Burger King, the same thing. Like, they did not want people to, if the big boss was there, like, for some reason at 10 o'clock, if the big boss was there, they had to throw the stuff away. Now, mind you, somebody could have ordered a custom burger and they didn't want it, or they didn't pay. A number of things. It could have still been wrong because we got the order wrong. They would tell you, throw the food away instead of going ahead and eating it. And I always thought that was, why would you do that? Like, we're here serving these customers. We're going to be hungry. Why not just give it to the employees? No, this is why this parasitic equity, which y'all haven't seen that video yet, but it's coming. This parasitic equity got to be removed. These guys are parasites. Only parasites cannibalize their own abundance. And by forcing us into that behavior, they have literally, it's just a mess. Like, it's just a mess. Let me go back. Such perbins, income from daily services, could be inherited or even sold. Also, the temple, so basically, if once, whatever you once were, you would want, especially if you worked in a temple, you would pass that along to your child. You would try. It's like a good government job. Oh my goodness, it's like a good government job. You get a good government job. You make sure your child gets a good government job. You make sure your child's child and your child. But they corrupted the whole system, which is why it's not working. Because the government is not the temple of the God. The government is not the temple of the God. That's what they tried to do. Make the government the temple of the God. It is not. It is not the temple of the God. It's just not. Also, the temple personnel receive regular food rations from the temple's income. A temple housed craftsmen, such as carpenters or basket weavers, for its upkeep and eventual repair, millers, bakers, or brewers in the food production, guards, gatekeepers, courtyard sweepers, and for the care of the temple. The temple's fields were cultivated by plowmen and their attendants. Furthermore, a temple cared for orphans, blind, or elderly people. Apparently, by sustaining the temples, the ruler fulfilled his promise to care for the poor and neglected, and for the widows and the orphans of his country. All these persons linked to a temple who did not perform priestly duties lived on temple resources. Listen, America is the temple, not the government. America, the land, is the temple. The king is not doing his job. Now, I don't know if the God of the temple is going to depose the king. I don't have no say in that. But the king is not doing his job. People are out here suffering. People are out here suffering. They don't have enough food. Everything costs too much. It's too much going on. You know where is not the temple? Ukraine. That country over there with the professional victims unit is not the temple. It's not the temple. Therefore, why temple resources are being given to Ukraine, the professional victims unit, and everybody all off the planet to eat and drink of the teat of El Shaddai is unacceptable and must be stopped immediately. America first. America first. Okay? Not Ukraine. Not professional victims unit. Not UK. Great Britain. No. America. America first. And Americans first. And those people who serve the temple, all of these people who don't worship our God, El Shaddai, Al Shatain, Set, whatever, all those people who don't worship our God, that are temple workers, they're here on our land, they work in our temple. And if they're not doing their job, they need to be handled like temple workers would be handled who weren't doing the job. And of course, the blind, the deaf, the dumb, the sick, the needy, the temple needs to provide for. Not providing for millionaires and billionaires. Absolutely not. Not providing for these rich and famous people. Not providing for these foreign invaders. Go to your land and worship your God. And leave us, our land, and our God alone. Okay? Temples employed singers and musicians, and they must have sung regularly at the hymns and prayers praising the gods. The priests served food to the gods and assisted in the rites which were performed by the high priest and purification priests. In approaching the temple from the perspective of the persons living on the temple's holdings and income for food, it becomes obvious that a Babylonian temple was much more than a home of a deity. The temple, as an important employer, is certainly only one aspect of its social relevance, but is not the least one which can be added to the points addressed above. Meaning, the temple has employees, not bureaucrats, okay? Not government workers, employees who did important work, not bureaucrats, not government workers, totally out of alignment, okay? Religion at the palace. As we have seen, we got a lot more pages ago. As we have seen, a Babylonian temple was more than a religious institution. On the other hand, we are going to discuss presently, religion was not at all restricted to the temple. Religion may be seen as a salient feature of Babylonian culture, which could not exist independently of culture. Being a Babylonian meant believing in the Babylonian gods. The so-called political center of the country, the palace, was always a center of religion too. The king acted for his land and his people before the gods. and the immortals bestowed well-being and fertility to the king as a representative of his country. In this role, the king participated in the state festivals of the temple. First and foremost, the New Year's festival at Babylon. Every year, the king returned his insignia to the god, and after swearing that he had not done any harm to Babylon, he was set in office again. This was every year. The king had to be checked every year. It wasn't every 4 years, it was every year. Did you help the people? Did you do what you were supposed to do? Okay, let's check you. Let's check your record. Bring us the notes. Bring us the records. Let's see if the king did what he was supposed to do. And if he didn't, El Shaddai would strike him down. Okay? The divine ruler Marduk and the earthly ruler left the cella hand in hand for the festival procession at the Circle of Destinies in the central courtyard of Marduk's monumental sanctuary at Babylon. The god pronounced the destiny of the king for the coming year. So the annual festival at Babylon, the king was presented as the one crown protected by divine ruler. The king, as sole representative of his people, needed special protection, and so religious specialists were present at the palace to explore the will of the gods and to dispel evil. Religious life at the royal court is best known for the Assyrian palace of the 7th century BC, but since the rituals of the diviner and exorcists were, as a rule, Babylonian origin, we may safely presume a similar religious life at the palace of Babylon too. This is confirmed by inscriptions of Babylonian kings or by incidental references in various kinds of texts. The diviner had to disclose decisions of the gods, be it past or future events. The usual way to obtain this knowledge was by means of exospicy, that is, observation of a lamb's liver and other intestines. In this technique called future telling, the formation and wrinkles of the fresh liver were regarded as a message of the gods, which could only be deciphered by highly trained specialists, the seers, and they had to work quickly since after a very short period, the uneven surface of the liver became smooth and the writing disappeared. The diviner was consulted before important decisions such as military expedition or the appointment of an official. In the case of any evil that has befallen the king, an illness, or even a malicious, ominous sign, the exorcist or incantation priest was called to perform appropriate rituals to dispel the evil and to let the king's personal god return. These religious specialists were not affiliated to a temple, and they performed their services for every person who could afford it. The most able specialists, however, were employed by the palace. Who's the most able specialist on the internet right now? Who else has these capabilities? Who else is predicting this stuff? I mean, it's a couple astrologers that are really good, but that's us who've been doing this research, who know how to interpret our dreams, who know how these cycles work, who observed the natural move of the planet and can apply that to what we see out there. That's us. That's what we're supposed to do. And yes, they're supposed to pay. Whoever can afford it, they're supposed to pay. There's no doubt about it. They know that they're supposed to pay. They're lying, acting like they're not supposed to pay. No, they're supposed to pay. And they're supposed to pay us. Period. Private habitations could include small shrines in the early periods of Babylonia, and in the same way, a palace could house sanctuaries for the protective deities of the royal family. In Babylonia, this seems to be restricted to the early periods until the second millennia. Also, the cult of the ancestors of the family was a religious duty performed in the palace as in any other house. The forefathers of the master of the household were venerated and their names were called and thus preserved from oblivion, as every person would hope for his own future. Okay, I won't. In summary, the palace was an important center of Babylonian religion. This religious role, however, differed mainly in scale, but less in substance from the private houses and their inhabitants. The uniqueness of the figure of the king in Babylonian society, however, implies a unique importance as of the king as a religious person. The palace life of the Babylonians. In Babylonia, the palace was not only a building, but also an institution that could, for example, sell goods or write tablets to testify the ownership of the land. The government. The palace, the king was the head of the government. Their governmental order. That's what they're saying. The palace, as a seat of the ruler, controlled law and order in Babylonia, and the king himself was the highest judicial authority. So the palace issued various regulations to the country, but it served also as the highest law court. In this regard, the royal palace of Babylon was very much respected by the inhabitants. It was hoped that a legal dispute would not end up in Babylon. The private letters of old Babylon, so meaning you're not supposed to go to court for everything. You're supposed to stay away from court. Resolve your issues among yourselves. There's lots of ways to solve problems. You don't have to immediately go to court. But that's what these people too do. They run to the judges. Why? Because they paid them off. It's rigged. Okay. The private letters of old Babylonian period allude to this function at various occasions, and one may find threatening phrases such as, if this is not the case, I will write to the palace, or you will not be able to meet the claims of the palace at Babylon. The respect paid to the palace by the Babylonians is not only based in its judicial role. Because of its concentration of economic means, the palace employed the most able and most influential persons of the state. So it seemed, and so what they did, how they faked that in America is that all the black people live in PG County, which is right outside of DC. And most of the bureaucrats in the government were black. So they just hired all these black people and said, yeah, see, look, we got the most influential people in the state. But they were all sellouts. They didn't worship the same God. So again, they got it wrong. Another huge mistake. A swing and a miss, okay? So it seems to have been the Babylonian dream to go up to Babylon. We moving on up to the east side to a deluxe apartment in the sky. That's what they're talking about. Oh, you got your good government job, boss. You're going to be set for life. And your children and your children's children. I'm sorry. All right. So it seems to have been the Babylonian dream to go up to Babylon, enter the palace, and whoever managed this was accompanied by good wishes of his relatives and clients. This is expressed in the greetings of an old Babylonian letter. The protective deities of my daddy may grant you, my father, a long life, still as an old man with a good name in the palace where you are walking about. Also, in an economic sense, the palace was central in the life of Babylonians. The ultimate power of the land was the king, who gave it to his subjects, who were obliged in exchange to perform corvée work. The palace collected taxes from various brands. In the old Babylonian period, various economic sectors were not directly controlled by the palace, but entrusted to entrepreneurs. Oh, wait a minute. They were entrusted to entrepreneurs. Isn't that interesting? These entrepreneurs had to deliver either the products of agriculture, cattle breeding, cultivation of dates, or fishing directly, or an equivalent in silver. So basically, whatever you borrowed, whatever was angel invested to you or invested to you by the palace, you had to return in like kind. Is that taxes? No. No, because the palace would give you the money to go and do the thing you were trying to do, and then you would come back with the harvest. That is not taxes. That is not taxes. So taxes are not in here, okay? Not. We're going to talk about that, though. It's coming up. Thus, the surplus of the economy of the country was collected by the palace. Only a part of the incoming goods were stored since they had to be used to meet the state's expenses. So basically, you would invest in these entrepreneurs, they would go do their thing, bring back the harvest, the abundance, and then the state would sell it. That's how commerce is supposed to go. All these trade deals, yes, that's how commerce is supposed to go. That's the function of the commercial state, to take the products that we as the individuals produce and help us sell it to the world so that we can take care of the state. That's how commerce is supposed to go. How it's not supposed to go. You get a job, you work for 30 years, you never get anything, and you die with nothing. Not how it's supposed to work. No. You're supposed to be free to go and do your thing. Create the abundance, give back to the palace to take care of the people. That's how things are supposed to work. The treasuries of the palace. The cuneiform archives of administrative texts found in palaces are primarily concerned with the specific category of goods that one may term prestige or luxury goods. This shows clearly that the administration of goods such as the storable textiles and precious stones, as well as delicacies, formed a central task of the palace. This can be observed in the whole ancient Near East in an impressive continuity and consistency. Those prestige goods, of course, did not serve the basic needs of food, clothing, tools of everyday use, but they stand out for both their uselessness and their immense value. At the least obvious case, perhaps, the character of meat is a luxury good. We should not forget that meat was not usually offered at the ordinary man's table. Of the delicacies served at the palace, one should also mention that wine was served instead of the more ordinary beer. The objects of silver and gold were of high value because of material used. Precious metals had to be imported, but the silver was standard currency in Babylonia, only interrupted by a short phase of gold pieces. Textiles are more difficult to evaluate, but here the enormous amount of labor spent to produce valuable textiles has been accounted. Also, precious metals were transformed into masterpieces of handicraft, such as vessels or jewelry, and the texts abound in references to figurative decoration, inlays, or granulation. The female weavers or the goldsmiths working at the palace had to be sustained by the income of the country too. These are people who produce something. Oh my gosh, y'all. We're almost done. These are people who produce something. These are not people who couldn't do anything, who weren't contributing. Okay? And the amount of labor added to the high value of the goods of the palace's luxury. Although only the palace could acquire and produce these luxury goods at a high level, the production involved many more craftsmen and specialized workers. In this way, segments of the population participated in the economy of the palace. The precious goods were not only kept inaccessible in inaccessible treasure chambers of the palace. This would contradict the character of prestige goods, which have to be shown in order to have the effect of excessive splendor and thereby power, i.e. Birkin bags. This principle of conspicuous consumption, the multiple presentation of the acquired goods, is dealt with in the brilliant analysis by Thorstein Veblen in his Theory of Leisure class. As a matter of principle, prestige goods are always diametrically opposed to the useful and productive. This concerns not only the character of the goods, but also their users. Veblen points in his contemporaneous world to women serving for prestigious purposes and relieved of the ordinary duties, to the army of the levied servants, the members of an elite class who are not occupied with productive work. It is important to note that only the palace was able to distribute such treasuries. Of course, the court followed common social norms and conventions, and thus presence can be found at other levels of society too. But only at the palace did the expenditure of goods take on such a scale that it was regularly documented in administrative texts. And here, Only the palace was able to distribute such treasures, not the other institutions of Mesopotamia, including the temple. The temple does not give gifts. Only the palace, the king, can give the gifts. So that means if we get a gift, it has to come from the king. That's the proper order. The distribution of the excess comes from the king. That's the proper order. In our case, the king is the president, not the states. The states are like the small temples. The king. Temples managed the agriculture they received rich donations by the ruler, including gold and silver, and thus served as a kind of treasure chamber. But the temples could not pass on these goods. So what are these churches doing? Harvesting the energy of their members and giving it to these guys. Like, they're not supposed to do that. What are they doing with all this money they're collecting in these churches? They're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to let the government give them their money. They're supposed to let the king give them their money. They're supposed to take a little bit from the people and give the excess to the king. So why are churches tax exempt? All right. Let's keep going. Not all treasures delivered to the palace were stored there, but a part of them were distributed. Interestingly, not only the materials treated by the administrative texts from palace archives, but the recipients of the goods were strikingly similar throughout the history of Babylonia. A large amount of goods were delivered to the gods in the temples, meat or other delicacies for offerings, or silver and gold as dedications. This meets our expectations, since the ruler owed his office, the stability of his rule, and the welfare of the country to the gods. Therefore, the gods received a fitting share of the precious goods that had been produced by the combined forces of the whole population. The palace also spent some of its treasures for purchases, but perhaps, contrary to our expectations, the palace did not only invest in the silver to buy necessary goods and materials, especially tin to produce bronze, but spent it for luxury goods such as lapis lazuli, expensive riding animals, or textiles. The Mesopotamian merchants acquired the materials that could not be found in alluvial plain, namely wood, resins, stones, and metals in the eastern mountain ranges. A large part of trade was thus linked to the prestige and economy of the palace. Textiles or jewelry could be presented as gifts to persons. In a large part, the presents left the country and were given to other rulers and their courts, or they were presented to messengers and representatives from abroad who came to visit the royal court. Listen, there are no other rulers out there. They're supposed to be giving them to us. The kings and queens of the households of the land. Okay? The scribes of the pertinent administrative text sometimes noted that these presents were sent at birth, marriage, illness, and death in the family. I'm about to lose it. Okay. Death in the family. Of course, after an appropriate time, the recipients of the gifts repaid their debt with a counter gift according to the habit and expectations, and these gifts were noted in the administrative documents as incoming goods. Strictly seen in a strictly economic perspective, this might look like an exchange without any profit or loss, but at least products typical for the province were exchanged. To mention one example, in the later Bronze Age, the 14th century BC, some documents shed light on the exchange between the courts of Babylon and Egypt. Here, Babylon sent lapis lazuli, which it acquired from the east, and horses, which were specially used for battle chariots, to Egypt, and the Egyptian pharaohs returned the much desired gold to Babylon. The letters exchanged between the courts give a vivid description of the exchange. The Babylonian king complains, "But now, when I sent a messenger to you, you have detained him for 6 years And you have sent me as my greeting gift the only thing in 6 years, 30 minas of gold of the quality of silver. I'm talking about rose gold. When you celebrated a great festival, you did not send your messenger to me saying, come eat and drink, nor did you send my greeting gift in connection with the festival. It was just 30 minas of gold that you sent me. And he ended the letter. For 10 wooden chariots and 10 teams of horses I send to you as a greeting gift. The letters make no secret of the purpose of the gift exchange. It is for the good. It is for the good brotherly relations that are maintained by the constant, we're almost done, y'all, by the constant exchange of gifts. So the given away riches proved to be clever investments in the political future of the own state. Another group of recipients mentioned in the administrative text are persons from the ruler's own country. To understand Okay, to understand these presents, we have to be aware of the ambivalent character of the gift. The material benefit is always connected with the obligation to repay the debt. This debt need not be repaid materially as by the equal, but the status of the debt can be kept forever and thus implies a permanent obligation. So like I've been saying, if a rich person gives you something, they offer you something, they hold you in debt forever. So if they give you a bonus, say, oh, we're giving you a bonus here. Now they own your ass forever. That's their culture. The ruler generously distributing gifts by this means obliged the people, therefore acquiring symbolic capital which only enabled his exertion of power. Who received the precious presents of textiles and jewelry from the royal court? First, there was the family of the ruler, his wife, and the queen mother, sons and daughters, and wet nurses. Birth, marriage, festivals, illness, and death offered occasions for presents to other courts as well as family members of the family of the highest dignitaries of the palace. Personal occasions, not political deeds, provided a background for gifts, but the close relations within the family and with the highest officials was the firm fundament of any exertion of power. The study of administrative archives leads to the recognition of the important role of the army. Generals among the most important recipients of gifts. Military success is the occasion for festivals where gifts are distributed. And even the messenger bringing good news is rewarded. Large quantities of the best food, especially of meat, are given to the army invited by the palace. The meal of the king in the palace of Mari, remember Mari is in Russia, was an opportunity to show off wealth of the palace. And the Mari people in Russia, Putin protects. We talked about this 2 or 3 years ago now. Though the richness of the food that was offered, it was also a chance to display the elite of the country who were invited to the banquets with the generals of the army and foreign messengers. The administrative personnel of the palace received such goods only occasionally, and priests rarely mentioned among the recipients. So the priests didn't get these gifts. Without doubt, the cultic personnel received its share of the offerings brought to the temple. Apparently, the king was not interested in obliging the highest priest with the bribe of precious goods. And finally, one group also appears regularly among the recipients of prestige goods, namely performing artists such as singers, musicians, dancers, and acrobats. Art is linked to the palace, and the artistic decoration of metal, vessels, and probably textiles is another instance of this connection. Even if the prestige goods are concentrated at a restricted upper class, they determine the economy and society of the whole country. Their acquisition by ways of trade and gift exchange and their production require all available resources. These goods could be distributed to more persons than just a small group at the center of power if one considers recipients as messengers of the army. And furthermore, festivals offered occasions to distribute the precious goods of the palace to all the people. These goods serve more important purpose than an economic one because the gifts of the ruler consolidated and strengthened the society. The ruler and the temple. The palace was the home and governmental center of the king, and so his treasures were used to erect buildings of the largest dimensions, to embellish them with the best works of art, or to assemble collections of rare plants and animals there. Interestingly, the building of a palace is hardly the main topic in inscriptions of Babylonian kings, a fact distinguishing them from the Assyrians. Babylonian kings dedicated more efforts to the large and venerated temples of the gods and to their equipment, with cultic objects such as a throne or a harp for the deity. This program concurs with the self presentation of Babylonian kings in their texts as been protected and guided by the gods, whose deeds were considered more or less cogent consequence of their status and power, but not historical deeds. Royal inscriptions are mostly written on durable materials such as stone, metal, or baked clay objects, so that the name of the ruler may be preserved forever in the context of his dedication to the eternal gods. The care of the ruler for the gods was based on ideology, but was not restricted to that. Ideology always determines the distribution of resources. So the dominant role of the gods in the worldview of the Babylonian rulers led to the most impressive royal building programs, being the erection and equipment of the temples. Furthermore, the sacred furniture was donated by the king, and at various occasions, precious objects such as vases of gold, silver, or jewels were dedicated to the temples. Together with dedications of new buildings or of cultic objects, the king usually funded the temple with grants of land. Land grants? So the king funded the temple, America, with land grants. Okay, or other sources of income, so that continuous offerings were ensured. So that's why the King King Fatfingers, or the queen before him, believes that we are supposed to provide them with unlimited return. Okay? Absolutely not. This is the this is the throne of the creator. Okay? In this way, the temple wasn't able to care for its dependents as outlined above. The whole world is not the dependents of America, okay? The people who are here in America, who are from this land, are the dependents of America. The people who worship our God are the dependents of America. If you don't worship our God, you're not our dependents. We don't have to take care of you. And that especially includes those people, the professional victims unit, and those people in Ukraine. They don't worship our God. We're not required to take care of them. Period. On preceding pages, various aspects of the main institutions of Babylonia, temple, and palace have been discussed. One could easily add other related topics, outline the personnel of each institution, the rules obeyed within the palace, or the regulations to become a priest. Instead, the focus has been laid on the basic functions as they emerge from a contrastive discussion of two realms. For example, the restricted religious role of the palace and the economic supremacy of the palace deriving from its control prestige goods. These two institutions can hardly be imagined independent of each other for most of Mesopotamian history. But Babylonia experienced a major change in 539 when the rule of the last Chaldean king, Nabonidus, was ended by Cyrus the Great over the of the Persian Achaemenids. From then on, no indigenous Babylonian king ruled over Babylonia, and that fact hardly and the fact that hardly any building inscriptions for the Achaemenids exists reveals that the close relationship between the palace and the temple had changed. It's surely no coincidence that after the end of the Babylonian royal palace, the temples gained larger importance in the tradition of knowledge in Babylonia, and that all scholarly experts were linked to the temple. Only now, priests controlled the Babylonian literacy and scholarly texts written in cuneiform, and our sources document their scribal productivity until the 1st century BC. The learned priests of the temples, furthermore, became experts in astronomy, astrology, which included both mathematical calculations and the omens to predict the impact of the celestial bodies. This science was the foundation of the later fame of Babylonia in the West. So after a long tradition of coexistence between temple and palace, the Babylonian temple outlived the later by half a millennium, therefore preserving and developing culture and scholarship, which was what's prominent at the palace. See, the church took over what the king was supposed to do. Okay? And if we're the kings and the queens of this land, we have to get back into what the business of the palace. You must get back to the business of the palace. You must get back to the business of Shaddai. She is a temple of the mountain. So you have to get back to her business. And until you get back to the business of the Temple of Shaddai, you will just be a subjected to the rule of the priest. So if you don't want to be subjected to the rule of the priest, get back to the business of Shaddai. Shalom, peace and blessings, and we'll see you in the next video.